Okay, Roger once again, Mudfossil University, and as advertised, I will take you all the way from vibration, which is sound, up to heat, light, all the way up to anti-gravity. All right from this picture. Now, it's called the Aetherial electron flood theory. And what that means is in the ancient times they talked about the ether. It's A-E-T-H-E-R, ether. And it is the electron flood of the universe. We are literally in an electron soup. This is what they call an atom. They link together with these outside electrons and they hook together with other atoms. But in between them there's a whole sea of these little electrons. So they're all floating around. Once they hook up with another one, they're pretty solid inside that sea. But that sea still exists. Internally, in a solid structure, there may not be much movement, and that means it is resistive and it is an insulator. If there is a lot of these electrons within that structure and they move freely, that is a conductor. All right? Now, this is nuclear materials. That's the nucleus, obviously. It's the same as the nucleus. And they're showing that an electron hits the nucleus and breaks the nucleus. That's just incredible. Well, they're showing us. They think it's a neutron. Now, there is a whole different story to this entire thing. And I believe it relates to the flood of electrons and then the extreme removal of electrons. That the extreme removal of electrons creates anti-gravity. Now, when you heat something up, you are literally forcing electrons into that mass of atoms that is all held together. And as you force those electrons in there, they vibrate so chaotically that they create heat. Now, as they create heat, if they heat so much that they shake so bad they go flying off, that's light. Now, when you heat something, you're forcing electrons in. When you cool something, you're pulling electrons out. When you pull those electrons out at an exact certain temperature, superconductors will cascade into a superconducting mode. So they'll sit there and they'll sit there and they'll sit there, and then all of a sudden it gets minus 75 Celsius or whatever it is, and all of a sudden bloop, they pop up and they float an exact distance away, and that is because it has sucked enough electrons off and they can't get back into that atom fast enough to support gravity. And the same thing can happen by frequency manipulation of the angstrom unit distances of these atomic orbitals, shaking them into what they call a resonance standing wave, or somewhat similar to that, which creates it to vibrate so violently in its atomic orbital that it cannot maintain there. It will jump into the next orbital up. And at that point, I believe the atomic core becomes anti-gravity. And I can tell you, the reason I say that is because I'm saying it's because of the removal of the excess electrons, and somehow the lowest shell of electrons is the only thing that's allowed, and you still have anti-gravity like helium and hydrogen. But once you get outside of that, you got to get all of those away, and this is what happens in a nuclear blast. If you ever notice a nuclear blast, here's how they work. They have all kinds of packed stuff that's real close together, this stuff, and they have a ton of extra electrons and all that business. And then they put all kind of charges around it, and they smash it all in solid. And when they do that, they violate all kinds of Heisenberg rules and Pauli principles, and they can't exist in the same places. It is too much magnetism. The first thing that happens, it crushes it together. The second thing that happens, all the electrons expel in a violent electronic white cascade of light. As we all know, the brilliant bright light and then the column goes straight up in the air. And that's because it doesn't have any more electrons. It's going into anti-gravity. You look at it, you watch, they go straight up in the air. Alright, so we've gone from vibration, where you just tap these things and they shake a little bit, up to heating them, where they really start shaking and vibrating, the electrons. The cores stay solid until you crack them, and that's serious. That's when you do the nuclear stuff that I just talked about in atomic blast. It not only breaks these up, it throws every electron away. And as these break up, they begin to stabilize, but they're anti-gravity and they arise. So that is the whole story of energy. Now, I have about 10 different videos on this, and I'm going to show it with every single energy, like sonoluminescence, boomoluminescence, which is the sonic boom when an airplane goes over. What that whole story is cracking the ether. All right, it's cracking the ether. We are in a soup, and if you come through that soup so fast, like with a lightning, it cracks the ether, and when it collapses back onto itself, just like sonoluminescence, it explodes with a thunderous collapse. And the same thing happens with sonic booms. All right, so this is not something that's, and the same thing happens with a bullwhip. You're cracking the fabric of space, which is the ether. And the ether is continuously around. There's no question. You get static on you, you're walking through the air. If there's enough moisture, it takes it off you. You've got tons of electrons. And this is my background. I know this. Trust me, I know this. Because I worked on trying to eliminate that kind of static. And it was a nightmare until they came up with the toroidal coils and all these different choke coils. You see them on the back of the cords of your monitors and things like that. They're a little lump. What that does is, as an incoming spike comes in to attack your equipment on a high frequency spike, and it oscillates through there, when it hits that choke, it clamps it and it crushes it, and it stops it from affecting your equipment. And that's, we lived with that for 15 years until it was figured out. It was a real problem. We had some other ways of dealing with it, but it wasn't easy. So what I'm getting at is there's a lot to know about this, and it's not that hard. It's really not, this is it. This is the whole. How hard can this be? You just got to think of these things being surrounded with a bazillion of these little things. And what's coming down from the sun is these little things. It's not these. It's the little ones are coming down. And those are the electrons. And they get sucked to the earth, literally sucked to the earth. Because the earth has a positive pull and a negative push. Same with these. They have a positive in here and a negative. And the positive pulls everything else, because these are negative, and these also are pulled because they have a positive and negative. So the positive pulls the negatives, and the negative, which exceeds the positive just by a hair, keeps those electrons, these only negative particles, from getting in there. So the positive sucks them in, but the negative says, no, all the way, right to there. And now I'm going to show you an example of that, and then I'm going to leave it at that. But that's anti-gravity. Okay, these are extremely strong magnets. This is called Incredible Tractor Beam Magnet. And this is by Lanthman's Crazy Machines. Now, watch this. Here's what happens. He comes, you see it, watch. He pushes it away. Now what he's going to do is turn that magnet over. You see that? Now it's going to attract it. Now, alright, you see what just happened? I'm going to explain to you right now. You notice that this could be pushed away by this. So we know that it can repel. So we know that that means those are both the same, both negative forces. All right. Now, it also can attract. We can see this right now. It's attracting. So that means one of them is negative and one of them is positive. Now, we notice there's a gap here, and he cannot get it away from that gap, and it does not want to get any closer than that gap. He can shake it and so forth, and I will explain what happens as he shakes it, but it wants to be exactly there, and other ones will come around this in exact quantum distances and exact angular and crystal formation, call it that way. They're going to come in here and they're going to push against this way, and they're going to push against each other, and they're going to push against any other ones that come in, and you will end up getting a pattern of electrons around your core. Now, so we saw it can push away, we saw it can attract, and it will not come any closer than that. So let's see what happens now. All right, he's going to start shaking it. You see, he puts it back down, boom. These things really attract. Because one way it goes, now here he goes. Now watch, he can get it away. And if he puts it in there and he starts shaking it like crazy, it is going to be, what? We'll see, there it goes away from it again. Alright, over here we're going to see him. Watch what happens over here. It's caught in here. Now, as he shakes it, that is heat. You see that? Heat, 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 hotter and hotter and hotter. And all of a sudden, it took off. That would be light. Now, and light comes out of here at different frequencies. We know that because different lasers produce different frequency lights. So they vibrate at different frequencies. So this is fairly well understood now as far as I'm concerned. Okay, watch this right here. There's a firecracker has gone off. This is the internal, this is the external. It's expanded. You see these little sparkly little diamond looking lights? You see them all over here? Now watch what happens. It's boiling. Those lights are boiling. I'm going to stop this and explain this. It started out, there was a little firecracker in here. It explodes. It creates a cavity in the water from that chemical reaction, which reacts and it expands the water. Well, what happens is there's a shock wave ahead of it. And that shock wave ahead of it literally rips space and leaves an empty nothingness here. And what that does is it sucks the electrons all out of the water. And the water now sucks the electrons out of the ether, which is anywhere that touches anything on the outside, because electrons are in a soup. So it has fulfilled its electrons by pulling them out of the water. This has pulled these electrons into the fabric of space, and now the electrons have nowhere to go. They're going to boil, and you're going to see them boil just like you see your stuff boil in a pan. And you watch them boil. Watch them boil, boil, boil. Now they're going to explode. Watch. Woof. And now that's the external glow that we're seeing, and now the event is over. Now, that creates millions and millions of degrees of temperature. And I will show you what happens at the surface, because the initial blast of the firecracker was literally nothing. The blast of the second collapse, that's where you got your energy. And that, I believe, we can either take that electron soup out of there, that boiling. It's a boiling mass of electrons. Why can't you just pop, bloom, and suck them out, suck them out, suck them out? Something like that. Hold on one second. All right, don't forget those sparkly lights. That is critical. Now, here it goes. This is the surface of the water as the firecracker explodes. You ready? Here it goes. Here we go. You're going to see, and you'll see, there it is. Now you're going to see a few little sparkly lights. That's the original one. Now it collapsed. Look at the sparkles come up. Look at them come up. Now you're going to see what happens after, which is the explosion from the collapse. There we go. Now we got some seriousness. So the first one was just a little tickle to the water. This is a nightmare to the water. And it left a tremendous amount of electricity flying. So that's all I can tell you. All right, this is John Hutchison. Now, this is the smoking gun. He's levitating these things. And I don't know if he knew what he was doing. I don't think he did. Look, watch this. There it goes. Watch this. That's a 60-pound cannonball. There goes that. Watch the things he can do. He destroys metal because he's shaking these things into a destroyed mode. Now, I'm going to show you what he has to say. Hold on. Here goes the cannonball. Let me just turn up the sound so you can hear it. Hold on a second.
Made a 60-pound cannonball rise off the table. It would also fuse dissimilar materials, heat metal but not burn the wood it sat on, shatter metal as well as change its crystalline structure.
All things
This was something to write home about.
totally explained.
Beginning of 1980, experimenting with all the electromagnetics and electrostatic equipments I had at the time, I started to notice some very, very unusual effects, such as a room being filled up very quickly with multicolored lights.
There it is. There's the smoker. I told you to look for those little multicolored lights in the explosion, creating the rip in the fabric of space. He's doing the same thing, but the way he's doing it is with frequency vibrations. He had a whole batch of frequency changes, and by doing that he can shake these molecules into destruction. Now I'm going to let it go a little further. He talks about all these different effects that were coming on, but what it really boils down to is he shakes the, watch this, the fluid comes right out, just the fluid. What he's done, and here you see, here we go, listen to this. Hold on, here he is just doing.
Dubbed by some as the poltergeist machine, there is no one machine. Just a lot of old army surplus gear.
You see what he's doing? All he's got is a bunch of frequency modulators. A frequency modulator says, okay, I'm going to turn this, and what it does is it goes, zip, you've heard that kind of stuff. It's going, instead of going like this, it's going faster and faster and faster. That's all. And he's turning one and turning others. He's doing all these different things. He is pushing the electrons away from the core. Somehow he's working in the angstrom units and getting those standing waves and getting it just right and then going and pushing them away from the core. That's anti-gravity. He's done it. It can be done, and I think it's easy. Okay, here's what I'm going to show you is this nuclear blast. That's the original impulse of light everywhere. Then a shock wave goes everywhere surrounding this. Then you have this extreme sucking up into the air of everything around it. You see this? This is where your core of intense energy is now, because it's being thrown off the earth because of anti-gravity. As I said before, originally your core is packed with nuclear material, which means the nucleus is, and of course there's going to be a lot of electrons, and that's just what happens. Now, when it comes crushed, the nuclear particles begin to literally fuse in the center, expelling all the electrons in that flash. The center now has lost its negative electrons and its negativity and becomes positive and starts fracturing and becoming very violent, sucking electrons into itself. And as it does, it immediately lifts straight up and pulls everything around it with it. And the ball of energy is up here because it still has to suck in the electrons to become stable again. That is what I'm saying is anti-gravity. Alright, now let's see another one. I haven't really looked into these very closely, but I do notice it happens on every single nuclear explosion because of the core becoming a positive. Look, see, this is where all your energy is now, is up in the air. You see it? Dragging everything off the ground. So that's what anti-gravity is, I believe. Could be looked into.